Hey, welcome to Everyday Faith, and today we are picking up with day 18, and I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to read the entire thing, and then I'll do some commentary and discussion at the end. So with that in mind, here we go. It comes from Psalm 119, verse 71, a psalm David wrote. It says, "My suffering was good for me, for it taught me to pay attention to your decrees." King David recognized that there was a time in his life when he needed to suffer in order to respond to God's law and his decrees. Our earthly suffering is sometimes a means for us to receive heavenly messages. Christian author and theologian C.S. Lewis, you might know him from Chronicles of Narnia, the Screwtape Letters, Mere Christianity, books like that. He wrote this: "God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks to us in our conscience, but shouts in our pain." Sometimes it takes something as drastic as suffering for God to get our attention, awaken us to his truths, and shape our hearts toward repentance and obedience. Take some time today to pray and ask God if there's a message he wants you to hear, reflect on what he says, and respond with an obedient heart. Now, this is kind of an interesting take on suffering, because a lot of times we look at suffering as something that is kind of out of our control. Something that maybe we don't deserve, something that we couldn't have planned for, something that we didn't expect. And, for the most part, that usually is true. There's a lot of evil in the world. There's a lot of hurt and pain and illness and things like that. And so there's certain things that we can't control. But the scriptures also teach that there is a time where suffering is brought upon based off of our sinfulness, our disobedience, our rebellion against God. And that sometimes that suffering is the only way for God to get a hold of our minds and to get a hold of our attention. And King David recognized that. If you know the story of David, then you know that David was far from a perfect person. He had an affair, he slept with a married woman, got her pregnant, then killed off her husband. And there's a whole list of other things that David did that were sinful and wrong and contrary to what God wanted for him. But he wrote here in this psalm that his suffering was good for him. He wrote that his suffering actually was the thing that allowed him to turn his heart, to turn his life back toward God. And sometimes, I don't know where you're at. I don't know what you're suffering through. I'm not sure what you've been through, but I do know my own life. And I do know that I'm far from perfect. And I do know that sometimes there's some consequences of choices that I've made and decisions that I've made that lead to some pain and some hurt and some heartache in my life. And the fact of the matter is that those things are oftentimes not because God wanted to, but God realized that that's the only way that I can get a hold of Ricky's attention is through this suffering. And you know what? I can say like David that it was good for me. It was something that helped me realize who God is, and that's not what God wanted, but if I continued down that path, if I continued on that journey, if I continued making those types of decisions, then suffering was basically the only thing I'd stand to get or stand to gain. And so, I don't know where that sets with you. I don't know what you're going through. But listen, if you need a hand, if you need some encouragement, if maybe you feel like this speaks to where your situation is or the suffering that you've been through in life, and you just want someone to connect with or someone to kind of encourage you through that, feel free to drop a comment and let us know, or send me a message directly. And I'll do my best to follow up with each and every one of you, whoever reaches out. And I'd love to encourage you in some way or another. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll pick up tomorrow.